Well, thank you very much, Holger, and thank you all for being here. I know this third day of the conference, people get a little tired, so thank you. Let's see. Tasmania, is there a pointer on here?
At the top, yes.
It's what?
At the very top.
There it is. Okay. All right. Twain's visit to Tasmania played a big part in his conversion to anti-imperialism in his later years, as told in Following the Equator. Conversion, that is, from a complacent belief that British and American colonialism and imperialism would be benign and unlike that of other nations, to something much different, largely the result of his lecture tour in 1895-96 to British colonial possessions south of the equator. Made necessary by his bankruptcy, Twain performed in Australia, New Zealand, Tasmania, much of India, and a short time in South Africa. Not a beautiful wine glass bay. The frying pan only temporarily covered the fire, however. It wasn't just that he was there and he learned the basic story of the genocide of indigenous people of Tasmania, but when he was back, he carried on considerable research into what was called the Black Wars of 1820s, 1830s. 60 years old and broke, in 1895 he set out with Libby and Clara to begin their cross-country trip to embark on their first ship, the SS Warramoo, out of Vancouver to Australia. In places, people at railroad stations cheered him on as he made his way across the country. Some of these kind souls took up collections to help repay his bankruptcy. It must have seemed like stepping on that Pacific gangplank was both a reminder and of the crucial role lecturing played in his recent past, trains, hotels, demands for payment, and also a call to adventure and imagination. Following the Equator is an observant, arch, open-minded, if erratic, book. It is much more than just a 19th century satire of travel books. For example, Chapter 5's visit to the Horn Islands, Alofa and Futura, favorite recruiting grounds for Queensland's slaves, gives readers their first glimpse of Oceania. Not that far from the abundant, magical place he believed Hawaii to be. It is a horrific picture of kidnap and slavery. After his disappointment in the Southern Cross, which he sees as crooked and out of repair, he describes the official line about recruiting and redefines it as man-stealing. However, he witnesses an attack on a slaver, Captain Juan, by the islanders, resulting in death and terrible injuries on both sides. Quote, "The truth is, Captain Juan furnishes such a crowd of instances of fatal encounters between natives, French, and English recruiting crews, for the French are in the business of plantations in New Caledonia, that one is almost persuaded that recruiting is unpopular with the islanders, else why these bristling string of attacks and blood-curdling slaughter." He continues, "But for the meddling philanthropists, the native fathers and mothers would be fond of seeing their children carted into exile and now and then to the grave, instead of weeping about it and trying to kill the recruiters." As to Australia itself, Twain finds much of interest, but is mostly repelled. He praises Sydney Harbor, but confesses, quote, "This stupendous blank is hot, not to say torrid. Part of it is fertile, the rest is desert. It is not liberally watered. It has no towns," end quote. He recognized the cruelty toward the nearly 100,000 convicts sent to Australia when London's prisons became overcrowded. In London, so it was in Australia, though. Even for a minor infraction like stealing silver spoons, a person could receive many, many lashes. The convicts themselves were in desperate shape. They were malnourished, mistreated by their own countrymen. Quote, some of the convicts, Twain says, indeed a good many of them were very bad people, even for that day. But most of them were probably not noticeably worse than the average of people they left at home behind. We must believe this, Twain insists, quote, we cannot avoid it. We are obliged to believe that a nation could look on unmoved and see starving, freezing women hanged for stealing 25 cents worth of bacon or rags, and boys snatched from their mothers, men from their families, and sent to the other side of the world for trifling offenses, a nation to whom the term civilized could not be applied. The English settler colonists in New South Wales were getting very uncomfortable. Twain mentions that under the convict sway, rum became the currency of the colony. Beginning in 1803, the convicts were sent to Tasmania. Waves of convicts followed through the end of the 1830s, the decade in which, of course, Twain was born. Nowadays we smile about Roughing It and Looney Tunes' Wile E. Coyote from the 1960s. However, we must look at another Looney Tunes character as well, this one from the 1990s. When most Americans hear the word Tasmania, what they're going to think of is the cartoon, Tasmanian Devil, right? But the one thing that people will know about Tasmania, they won't know much else, is the character of Taz in the cartoon. Tasmanian Devil. What will not spring to mind is the source of the character's name. It is both the name given to a rather vicious dog-sized marsupial, but it's also the name given to the convicts by the indigenous people of Tasmania. That's the creature. And there should be, yes. The convicts were sent to Tasmania with two orders. Cut lumber, because we're going to build here, and kill every indigenous person. Everyone. That were their orders. And they were given plenty of booze, plenty of money, and they went about their business. The Paleolithic ancestors of the modern indigenous people, the Palawa, who called our island Lutruwita, arrived from the mainland 35,000 years before and lived there 6,000 years after the isthmus to Australia was gone. However, like the cartoon character, the convicts sent from Australia to build infrastructure gobbled up the whole island instead. The convicts naturally abused the Palawans and took their land. They were in Tasmania ostensibly to harvest the lumber and raise sheep. But by the 1820s, the government decided to use the convicts to capture or exterminate the local people. And this is a very famous proclamation from the government showing, as long as you behave, everything's fine. If you don't, not so good. The convicts, then began the supervised and unsupervised genocide of the indigenous people, called the Black Wars or the Black Line. The islanders knew their island, and they were a lot better at guerrilla war than the convicts. But as the Palawa were often deemed too hard to catch for the 5-pound bounty, and simply killed, the seemingly inexorable line advanced, and these weren't just any bad white people plundering the oceanic people, traders, whalers, slavers, plantation bosses, and missionaries, of which there were plenty well into the 1920s. The biggest market for shrunken heads, for instance, was Paris, and the trade led to Oceanians slaughtering each other to cash in on it. Imagine a prison full of some of the most dangerous criminals alive, suddenly released into Eden with pay and lots of booze. One of the convicts' main duties, they were trying to build Hobart, and so that was what the lumber was for. But Twain says, quote, Tasmania was a convict dump. In one spot there was a settlement of juvenile convicts, children, who had been sent thither from their home and their friends on the other side of the world to expiate their crimes. Twain describes Hobart as a properly twee English town. He finds it the neatest and cleanest town the sun shines on. But it is a satiric contrast to its actual surroundings. Twain calls upon a lot of what he saw in the region as junior Englands. Most of Twain's on-site contact with the Aboriginal people was in the museums in Australia, what Gary Scharnhorst calls an imperial gaze. As Twain's notebook remarks, all these native races are dead and gone, or nearly so. The work was mercilessly swift and horrible. He concludes that whites did not kill all the blacks, but they promptly killed enough of them to make their own presence safe. From the dawn of civilization to this day, the white man has always used that very precaution. Afterwards, the government was embarrassed by the slaughter, but the worst was yet to come. Massacres of indigenous people in the northwest of Tasmania. In the northwest of Tasmania began in 1827 and culminated in 1828. Members of the P-Rappa and other clans of Palawans had fled the Black Line and were living peacefully in this remote region, foraging for local food. However, there were numerous ex-convict shepherds and sealers in that area. Skirmishes carried on. The major conflict was the whites stealing P-Rappa women for sex. The P-Rappa men fought back by killing dozens of ewes. Of course it would be ewes. But they lost. At one point, the shepherds threw probably 60 men over a cliff in a retaliatory attack. Things went to another extreme when the government sent a well-meaning man, George Augustus Robinson, who, starting in 1830, set out to rescue the remaining islanders, Christianize them, and resettle them. But Robertson's mission ended with banishing a few survivors to an island called Flinders Island, very remote, rocky, not a happy place. Twain muses about this, he says, they were gazing sorrowfully across the water at their lost home. Twain states, as far as Tasmania is concerned, the extermination was complete. Not a native left. But he was wrong. Though the Black War decimated them, they did not all die. Their descendants are building their tribal numbers, and now they are 30,000 strong. Their devotion is to environmental protection. Though the Black War decimated them, they did not all die, and they are quite activist about their tribe, and they feel that the land owns them. Similar to Hawaii, where I used to live, they call it the Aina, and it's everything. So nearly all the survivors with Palawan blood descend from 9 captured Aboriginal women who were taken off by sealers. And from those 9 women, it seems, almost everyone who calls himself Palawan descends from them. These people, Chugani and her husband Wureti, were supposedly the last Palawans, but they weren't. Okay. The genocide directed at the ancient land stewards of Tasmania is one of the most atrocious in history. Then and for years to come, locals as well as civilized Londoners were used to seeing prisoners' heads on spikes. Melville satirizes this in a comparison in Taipei. Who is more savage, the ritual cannibal or the civilized whites who treat prisoners diabolically? Twain's aim becomes British colonial power itself. And of course, I have to say, I'm sailing in the wake of fine work on Australia, Tasmania, indigeneity, and Twain, especially Susan Harris and Carrie Driscoll. Their insights are the best, but I wanted to fill in some important details about what happened in Tasmania and its effect on Twain, especially about there being survivors. In literary terms, despite its use of romantic stereotypes, this is a naturalist narrative. So, I'll just move along. I propose a different tack on following the equator in Tasmania, to examine the satire that Twain employs of the black Palawa against their white invaders. Invoking Greek and Roman heroes was not something Twain never did. There's quite a lot in Innocents Abroad, the visit to the Parthenon at night. Twain and his companion defied this cholera prohibition and did sneak ashore and into the Parthenon. In following the equator, various indigenous men, not white men, come for classical comparisons. Twain insistently compares the Palawans to Greek heroes. First, Leonidas and the 300. Should be a way to play this. Thank you.
We are with you, sire! For Sparta! For freedom! To the death! Spartans! What is your profession? See, old friend, I brought more soldiers than you did.
Into the hot gates we march.
Can you hear that? I can't hear it.
Into that narrow corridor we march. For our lands, for our families, for our freedoms, for honor's sake, for duty's sake, for glory's sake we march.
Okay, toward the end of the chapters about Tasmania, he references, of course, the Thermopylae, and he compares the Palawans' horrific forced journey over the frozen Cradle Mountain. As you see here, I didn't get the picture with all the snow on it, but trust me, it was pretty icy. Just like Leonidas, the Palawans were tricked and betrayed into death. At Cradle Mountain in Thermopylae, Twain says, the work was mercifully swift and horrible. Next, come comparisons to Napoleon at Waterloo. Now, I would say that is Napoleon before he invaded Russia, and of course, silly. Also, he brings in Black Douglas, a hero of Scottish independence. We have to remember, as great as he was, Napoleon and Leonidas both lost what they were trying to fight. Black Douglas was a Scottish knight of the 13th century who led the wars of Scottish independence with Robert the Bruce, and who led the wars of Scottish independence with Robert the Bruce. These reference the doomed heroic chief of the Big River tribe, once great but ultimately a failure. And like Napoleon too, who failed, he listened to his hopes and ambitions instead of reality. The chief in the chapter is starving for peace and an end to his family's suffering. However, he trusts the wrong guy, just like Napoleon. Many of Napoleon's advisors, like Talleyrand, betrayed him to Tsar Alexander, persuading him that the march on Moscow would reshape Europe in his image. The doomed march resulted in thousands upon thousands of deaths of his own men and horses. The river tribe chief is anything but arrogant, but he is doomed by his misplaced trust in the wrong guy. If there is a tragic moment in following the equator, this is it. Apollo, as we go along, Apollo, having either invented the lyre or having received it from Hermes, boasted that no music in the world could match it. Marsyas foolishly challenged Apollo to a music contest. The jury was all the other Olympians plus King Midas, king of Phrygia. However, I can't resist this. When the royal barber could keep the secret no longer, Midas had been given ass's ears for his transgression. Okay. Greek mythology shares with following the equator a sense of fatalism, that God is capricious and untrustworthy, like the Olympians who take sides. It seems no matter what we do for good, it always ends up backfiring if God or a God doesn't like it. Since the chief marker of class in England was where one went to school, let us recall that post-secondary instruction would have been in Greek and Latin and classics. So the people who get the jokes about the classical allusions are the same people who he's after. Those who wrote the jokes are the jokes. The Palawan women, and I'm concluding now, the Palawan women's endurance and courage in the not very usually heroic role of being snatched up and raped, but they prevailed. The Greek and Romans colonized most of the known world, and in the South Seas there seemed no limit to what the English, Germans, and French and Portuguese could get away with. It was the same story all over the South Seas. Tasmania marked a real difference in Twain's point of view for the rest of his life. Half-buried horrors topped off by a birthday decoration of a town. To conclude, the slaughter of men and boys and the rape of indigenous women of the Pirapa tribe took place on the far northwest corner of Tasmania, a fearsome place appropriately called Cape Grim. And here it is, worthy of its name. That's where they threw everybody off, right there. So, I'd love to go visit sometime, but I learned a great deal for this paper. Thank you very much.